Welcome to OverBoost 53. OverBoost is a podcast interview series featuring discussions with speedrunners about their history in speedrunning and gaming and the runs they're passionate about. I am your host, PMC Trilogy, and with me today is Konasumi. Konasumi, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be on. I'm very excited for this.
And I'm excited to congratulate you. This wasn't planned. I invited you onto the podcast before you made it onto the SGDQ 2021 games list. But nevertheless, very exciting to see that you got on there with a game. I think it's called Jelly Drift.
Exactly. Yes, Jelly Drift.
Yeah. Tell us about what. Well, first of all, tell us what Jelly Drift is, because I feel like I hadn't heard of it, so maybe other people haven't.
It's a really interesting arcade racing game. It has drifting in mind, as the name might suggest, and it is incredibly broken. The speedrun is about 5 minutes long for any percent, and you have to complete 5 tracks as fast as possible. And each track has a bunch of checkpoints to it, but you don't have to do the checkpoints in order. So often I'll be going backwards to the track, driving in and out of lakes, and doing these really cool wall runs. It's a really fun speed game and a really fun racing game run.
Yeah, no, it was. I mean, I was really impressed. I watched. I ended up watching your PB. I got the link off of your SRC profile, and I was watching and I was like, wait a second, like they don't do the checkpoints in order, and they don't really try to keep you on the track, or and like the way you abuse that too is really interesting, because you can also like reset to last checkpoint, so that's also an abuse in terms of doing the run.
Exactly.
How did you discover this game?
I was on Twitter one day, you see, and I follow the speedrun world record bot, and I see this tweet from it saying that someone got a new world record in any percent. I was like, what the heck is Jelly Drift? Is this some like mobile game? I saw that it had the initial D AE86 on the cover, so I was like, oh, I'm intrigued by this. And I go check out the leaderboards on speedrun.com, and I just see this amazing run, and I am so impressed. And at that moment, I knew I had to try it. And I'm so glad that I did.
Yeah, it's really neat, too, is that this isn't, it's an indie game, but it is certainly not a game that has a small leaderboard. I'm looking at the leaderboard right now, and there are 34 runners in any percent. So this is a pretty good board. Were you the only person who submitted this to SGDQ, or did you know?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I was the only one who submitted. But the community, yeah, it's very active. There's quite a few runners, and I look at the Discord sometimes, and there's people always sharing new strategies for levels and trying out even more categories. They just added a bunch of category extensions that do the game differently, some of which involve community-made mods for the game, which I think is always cool.
That's interesting. So now, your role, you've just been doing runs. Have you been involved in any of these community discussions in terms of new categories, or?
No, not really. That's been out of my hands.
No, I mean that's fair. I mean, but with indie games, especially indie games that either support or enable mods, like that's a big discussion. Like I know for me, the indie game that I've been running is a game called Teardown, which has a lot of mod support for it, and so we get people coming into the Discord being like, hey, have you considered adding a category or whatever for this particular mod? It hasn't happened yet, but I got a feeling it's going to happen at some point. And it sounds like it's working out for Jelly Drift so far.
Oh, yeah. And it reminds me also, there's the main indie game that I've ran that I'm known for is A Hat in Time. Mm-hmm. And with Hat in Time, there's a whole leaderboard dedicated to mod levels. People can go in and create their own mod levels for A Hat in Time. A Hat in Time is a 3D platformer in the style of Mario Sunshine. And people have made some really fun levels for that game. And the community has had a really good time playing a lot of the mods. Like just yesterday, I was watching someone speedrun a mod that was an hour long. So there's some pretty substantial mods out there.
That's a lot of work. Yeah, no, I had the fun opportunity at a Twitch Philly meetup before the pandemic to run into one of the Hat in Time mods, and I was telling people I was a speedrunner just to sort of like break ice, and that person talked my ear off about how they maintain a separate fork for speedrunners. Oh. I don't know if that's still true or if that was technically, if I understood him right, but it was very funny.
Oh, are you talking about game patches?
I think so. I think that's what I think that was my understanding, was that, yeah, I mean, it can be the case where speedrunners will want certain things to be available, and I mean, I watched your Hat in Time run. I'd also watched, I think previously, I want to say Amerlin was also a Hat in Time runner, who I had on the pod and watched a run of. So I don't know what the tricks are. I forget at this point, but that was my understanding, was that, you know, that the whatever the speedrun version is, you guys do it on a patch just for the speedrunning.
Yeah, so the way that works, on Steam, there's a betas tab where you can select different versions of the game to play on. And the developers have supplied all the key patches for that are viable for speedrunning. You can just select them down and then download it through Steam without having to mess with the console. And if you do have to get a different patch, there are ways to do that.
Sure.
But yeah, I think stuff like that is always cool.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's kind of one of the neat things. I mean, I think we'll get into this more when we kind of cover, you know, some of the other indie games as well. Because from watching just the VODs that you sent me, I could already tell there were stories of interacting with developers, and I certainly have some questions about specific games. But before we get to that, let's before we leave Jelly Drift, I did want to ask, have you had any interaction, or has the community had any interaction with the devs for Jelly Drift?
I'm not sure, because the developer is actually a YouTuber with a couple million subscribers. His name is Danny.
Okay.
He's made a bunch of games and he makes videos on them, but I don't know if he's interacted with the community much.
Interesting. All right, I'll be curious to see. Cool, I guess, right? I'm not too familiar with YouTubes. I wasn't aware that there were YouTuber game developers, I guess would be the way to put it. Way to describe
I didn't know
that.
either.
Yeah. Same, right? Same.
It's pretty cool though.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a good thing to put up there. Certainly, I prefer hearing about that than more videos about cheating or something. You know, like I definitely take game developing stuff every day. All right, well, let's go back in time then. Let's get the history portion of this underway. I always like to ask, how did you get into gaming? Where does that enter into your life?
I've been playing video games as long as I can remember, since I was maybe 3 or 4 years old. My mom's very responsible for that. Growing up, I had a GameCube, a PlayStation 2, and I played a lot of video games in my spare time. Played it with friends, played it with my parents, played it by myself. It's my favorite form of entertainment media. And yeah, just over time, it's just been something that I've done a lot.
Are there any
always been a part of my life?
Any titles that you would point to on the GameCube or PS2 and say, yeah, these are ones I remember playing with friends or with parents? I'd be especially curious what you played with your parents.
Oh yeah, with my parents, lots of Mario Kart. Lots and lots of Mario Kart. That was the main one we played together. I remember me and my dad also played a lot of Midnight Club 3, which is a racing game on the PS2. That one was a lot of fun. And yeah, also played a lot of Road Trip Adventure, as you know.
Of course, yeah.
That was the game I grew up with as a kid. That's how I got into it.
Would you have been going into like a store and picking these out, or reading a magazine? Like, how did you? Because like some of these I can kind of understand. Like Mario Kart, like of course everyone knows about Mario Kart. Like that's not a surprise. But Midnight Club 3, that's like a little more obscure. I mean, it's a Rockstar series. I guess it'll be Angel Studios, then Rockstar San Diego. I remember playing Midnight Club and Smuggler's Run and stuff.
Oh, awesome! But
Road Trip Adventure, which of course is the, I guess, European PAL name for this Choro Q game, that's even more obscure. So I'm really curious, like how that winds up in your hands. Do you have any idea?
I'm so glad I'm able to tell the story.
Okay, please.
Yeah, when I was a kid, I had a game called Road Trip the Arcade Edition, which was for the GameCube, and even though it shares the same name as Road Trip Adventure, it's a totally different game. I can go into like how that naming scheme is so weird outside Japan. But I had that game for the GameCube, and I think the disc got all scratched up and I couldn't play it anymore. So I asked my mom if we could buy a replacement. And I remember she went on Amazon and bought Road Trip Adventure for the PS2, which I don't blame her at all, like because the naming is so similar. Anyone could have made that mistake. But I ended up getting that game, and I fell in love with it. It's such a great adventure game. that I wish more people knew about.
No, that kind of thing with the parents and the naming, especially I think for products that have confusing localization or aren't necessarily being localized all at the same time. Like I'm in into a lot of mecha stuff, and I feel like I have a lot of peers who have the story of this. They got into a Gundam series when they were a kid, and then they asked for Gundam things, and then they got a Gundam thing that wasn't anything they recognized because it was a model for a different show that wasn't the one they were watching on TV. But how would your parents know, right?
Yeah, I don't fault them for that, of course.
You're right, exactly.
Yeah, that stuff does happen pretty frequently.
You said you had a different road trip game for GameCube. Was that actually because I know the series coming out of Japan? Well, we'll call it Road Trip series for now, but it's part of a toy line, a Takara toy line out of Japan, and there are some games that are localized under the name Penny Racers. I think I was reading up on this, and was this Road Trip game on GameCube actually a Takara toy game, or was it a different game, a different brand?
It's part of the Takara Choro Q series.
Okay.
Yes. It was more of a traditional, almost like a Mario Kart racing game. So totally different from the PlayStation 2 RPG you're familiar with.
Interesting. I mean, I can only imagine just because I looked through and there's 3 dozen of those games or something. I was looking at the full list, if you include all the ones that were even JP only. So I can only assume there's a full universe of games out there. Did you end up playing a lot of games in those series or going back to them at all? Because it seems like Road Trip Adventure is the standout title from what I understand. But I don't know. Did you dip further into that universe of games?
I have a little bit. I went back and played the arcade edition, which was the GameCube game I mentioned. I did speedruns of it actually for a little bit. Let's see. I did try out some of the games in the series I haven't played. Choro Q High Grade 3, which is the successor to Road Trip Adventure. It's a RPG that's styled a lot like Diddy Kong Racing. It has a very similar structure to it. And that was cool. It's not as good as Road Trip Adventure. There's some things that are a little off about it. And then I also played the game after that, which was High Grade 4. That one is a proper RPG, but it's not open world like Road Trip Adventure. Road Trip Adventure remains to be the best game in the series, in my opinion. But there's still a lot more games I haven't tried. For example, Choro Q Wonderful, which is the prequel to Road Trip Adventure. I've always wanted to try that, but it doesn't have an English localization. And since it's very dialogue heavy, I wouldn't be able to fully enjoy it.
Has that series gotten any attention in terms of fan translations at all? I'm guessing not.
It has actually.
It has. Okay.
I heard that there's a fan translation in development for Choro Q Works, which is the most recent Choro Q game, from what I understand. And that one was Japan only, and they're working on localizing it into English. So, yeah, I'm excited to hear more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's neat. It's definitely very cool to see people putting that effort, and especially for games that are worth it. I think recently there was a lot of news about Mizurna Falls. Have you heard of that one at all? Mizurna Falls.
Not.
It was just a Twin Peaks style PS1 game, kind of a Deadly Premonition, but more serious. More about the mystery as opposed to Deadly Premonition's sense of humor. But always cool to see that kind of effort out there. You mentioned playing games with friends as well, and that kind of segues into one of my other questions. This is a speedrun interview podcast, so we're probably going to mostly be focused on single-player games that we then speedrun. But I do like to see or ask what multiplayer games you've been into. That can be couch multiplayer, that can be MMOs, whatever you've done. League of Legends. I don't know. What sort of multiplayer games have you been into?
Let's see. The one I've been playing a lot recently is Rocket League. I'm sure everyone knows what Rocket League is. It's really fun, especially if you're playing with friends and you're teaming up. I've been playing that game on and off since it came out in 2015. And yeah, I've been playing a lot of that recently. That's really the only multiplayer game that I've been, I would say, into.
You never had a MOBA phase or an MMO phase or anything?
No. I tried League of Legends in high school because there was a League of Legends club, and it was the only gaming related thing there, so I thought I would try it out. I played a few matches, but it wasn't quite my thing. But I can see why people like it.
That's fair. You just made me feel very old. That's fine. The only MOBA I ever played was original Dota, which I would have been playing when I was in high school in like 2005, 2006. And so of course, League of Legends came out 4 or 5 years later. And I was like, what do you mean MOBAs are the big thing now? That's weird. But so history goes. You mentioned what about the couch co-ops though? Because you did mention some couch multiplayer. So would it have been stuff like Mario Kart that you would have been playing with friends, or?
Yeah, a lot of that. I played Halo a lot when I was in middle school, high school. Played a lot of Halo Reach, a little bit of Halo 4. That was also a multiplayer game that I was really into. A lot of Xbox Live titles, Call of Duty. That's what I was into in middle school before I really got into speedrunning. But ever since I got into speedrunning, I haven't been playing as many multiplayer games. But I still make time to do that because it's important to have fun with friends in game.
So one of the things that I try to figure out, and I wasn't able to figure this out, so I'm gonna ask you directly: what shows up first for you, speedrunning or streaming in Twitch?
That is a good question. I would say speedrunning, because whenever, like, a lot of people know who I am because of my GDQ runs versus my personal live streams. So I think that's a good verdict there.
Then I will ask, how did you discover speedrunning? How do you figure that one out?
So it goes all the way back to around 2011 and 2012. So I was about 12 or 13 years old at this time. And I was playing a game called Forza Motorsport 4, which is this simulation-esque car racing game. And in that game, I did time trials of one of the mountain courses called Fujimi Kaido, where I would do runs pretty much every day trying to get the fastest time down this mountain. It sounds a lot like Initial D. That's how I got into Initial D as well. And when I was doing that, and I met people who were also doing the same thing there, and it was around that time that I found Games Done Quick, as well as some speedrunning streamers at the time. And I started watching that, and I thought it was so cool and so interesting. And I really enjoyed watching Games Done Quick. Specifically, I remember very clearly, like, at night on like my mom's laptop watching GDQ in the late night hours. And I just knew that was something I wanted to try for myself.
Can you remember any of the particular streamers that you would have been watching all the way back then?
Let's see. I know one of them, Narcissa Wright, was one that I watched a lot. The Monkey Ball streamers, the Monkey Ball community at the time, is one that I watch a lot of those streamers as well. And that makes sense because Monkey Ball ended up being my first speed game outside of Forza, which were more IL runs more than anything. And then from there, I found out about Hat in Time and got really into that. And then I started branching off and discovering new games to run. And the rest is history. So
it's, I think it's interesting to me that some of your early games, so I mean, Super Monkey Ball, I'm assuming you were playing on console. And the reason I point that out is because, especially for someone who's been doing it a long time, speedrunning, it got a lot easier in after 2010, 2011, comparatively to before that, in terms of capturing and recording runs and being able to upload them. That wasn't the SDA days where it was really difficult to be able to do that. But it's still not as easy as it is, say, if you're rolling into the scene around 2016 when you have, a usable version of OBS and more capture hardware and things like that. When you were doing, your first console runs, how were you? What was your setup like? Your hardware software, were you using a Dazzle, or what was going on?
I had a Wii that I still have, and I used that to play Monkey Ball on the GameCube. I had a component video going out of the Wii and into a Hauppauge HD PVR2, which is quite an old school capture card. I got it for my birthday one year, and I fed that into my computer, which was not very good at the time. I was using some really cheap HP laptop, I believe. So the streams and the recordings I did, they weren't that great in quality.
Are they still available? Could you find one? Okay. Yeah, you don't have to find it right now. I'm just curious.
Yeah. That should be on speedrun.com.
Okay.
unless it's part of those Twitch VODs that were deleted a couple of years ago.
Right. You know,
so I'm not totally sure. Hopefully it is. But yeah, like at the time, like I was really limited to console runs at first. I felt like because my computer wasn't powerful enough to play games. Whenever I would play stuff like Hat in Time, the alpha and beta builds of Hat in Time, I should add, those lagged a lot, and it was barely playable, and yeah, not ideal for speedrunning.
Interesting.
But in the end, it worked out.
I know. I appreciate that snapshot as well. You know, especially the part about the capture card as what, you know, for doing it via component. Like, as you could tell, my expectation was that it was going to be, you know, composite and, you know, a dazzle or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
So it's definitely interesting to get that. Now, you know, in terms of the you know, sharing and posting, you mentioned some of these earliest recordings right away, you are, you know, submitting them to a leaderboard like speedrun.com. Is that right?
Right. I submitted my Monkey Ball 1 personal best to speedrun.com.
Okay, cool. Now you're capturing right away, because I always like to try and pin down to when you're making that jump from you know, from doing something that you're just trying to set a personal best for the fun of it. You mentioned the time trials. You know, you're just doing that. You probably weren't recording those, right?
No, but I had the replays available.
Okay, but you did have the replays.
Those are stored online.
Right. So much like you would have demos in old school Quake, you had an in-game mechanism for sharing that information. Weren't doing the extra work of hardware setup. But I always like to capture that getting over that threshold of doing it yourself. So would you say then that in terms of what we would consider like doing a speed run, which is to say capturing it, submitting it to a leaderboard, Super Monkey Ball was then your first, or?
I would say that's my first.
Okay.
Outside of Forza. Excellent.
All right. So this is leading into a list of individual takes that I like to get about, you know, just kind of asking about kind of across your collection of speed games. We got the first game. How about if you had to pick a favorite out of all of the speed runs that you've done, what would you identify as the best?
I'd say that's a pretty easy question. I'd say Hat in Time. Hat in Time is a game that's always stuck with me. I started running the alpha build back in 2014, a whole 3 years before the final game came out. You know, and since then I played it a lot, did a lot of runs of it, did a few marathon runs of it at various events, or I even did commentary for a GDQ race. And you know, I interact with this community a lot, and it's a game that means a lot to me because of all those things.
I want to ask a question about a Hat in Time, because I think you had sent me, I think you sent me two videos of Hat in Time. One of them was the co-op run, which was very funny. That was y'all were having a good time with that Calathon co-op run. But I wanted to ask that experience of speedrunning it not only for a long time, but also sort of over the period of its development. Were there any like big pros or cons to that kind of experience as opposed to speedrunning a more static game? Did you ever find yourself wishing like, man, I really wish I could just go back to an earlier build? Or, you know, I mean, it sounds to me like the Hat in Time devs have been very positive partners, you know, as far as, you know, developers in the community go. So it wasn't like, you know, they added invisible walls to break all the tricks or something. But, you know, I'm just curious, like, you're like, oh, man, like, you know, I wish it was a static game. Or was this experience rewarding in ways that you didn't expect?
That's a really good question. I never feel myself preferring the beta build to the final game just because of how much more developed and, you know, the final game is so much more than the beta and alpha builds, which were just very thin vertical slices of what the final game is. And I got to see it change a lot over time, not just through the alpha and beta, but also the final game where changes are made to the product after it's complete. And like, I don't really see a much of a downside to speedrunning such a dynamic game because it's easy to down patch. So if there's a preferred version you want to play on, you can just download that and use that for speedruns, which is what a lot of Hat in Time runners do. But I think it's interesting that we've entered an age of dynamic speedruns where games change over time and things are changed or patched, and you know the community, you know, works around that to play on the preferred version or have changes made, stuff like that. It's not just static console games anymore. It's these ever evolving games.
Yeah, I think because Hat in Time, that was a Kickstarter game, right?
Yes, it was.
But also now, especially in an era of early access games, and of course, there's a lot of discourse about early access. But for a speedrunner perspective, you're getting a version of the game that's going to change, and how much do you want to engage with that? I don't know. I don't know. There's necessarily a one size fits all answer, but it's definitely something I think will probably be coming up more and more. And it's good just to think about best approaches. It sounds like things have worked out really well with a Hat in Time, so maybe folks can look to a Hat in Time for lessons about how to approach things. But just I don't know. I wanted to kind of make a note of that as we were traveling along. Hat in Time worked out real well. How about a worst speed game? I hate saying worst, but like one that you did runs of and you're like, this really wasn't my thing. I'm not asking you to put a community on blast. I'm just saying like probably not coming back to it.
I'd say the first thing I'd find, or the first thing I think about, is when I did my 12-hour challenge run of Mario 64. And it's just not the game for me. I've seen runs of it before. It's very impressive and a really cool speed game, but it just didn't stick with me after playing it for about a few hours trying to learn 16 star. It just wasn't my thing.
That's fair. And that's also not the first time 12-hour challenges come up on this podcast. That's
I love 12-hour challenges. Those are always really fun.
Yeah, I feel like I want to specifically call out Jaxler as the king of the 12-hour challenge.
Yes.
Like half of his games, I was like, "How did you end up speedrunning this?" And he's like, "Well, I did a 12-hour challenge," and then I stuck with it. So like, oh, cool, that's all right, that's neat.
Yeah.
How about a game that you would like to speedrun, but you haven't gotten around to it yet? Maybe time reasons, maybe doesn't fit with what you're doing right now.
I'm not sure. I do know time does limit me in selecting longer runs. Mm-hmm. So stuff like Road Trip Adventure 100 Stamp, that's not really something I can do while the school semester is ongoing.
How long would that be?
That's about a 4-hour run.
4 hour? Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, because of that, I tend to go toward shorter games. But as of something that's upcoming, I haven't really put that much thought into it. Jelly Drift is the most recent game that I've picked up or took an interest in.
No, that's a good answer though. I think that's definitely come up before, especially for folks who, who aren't doing speedrunning or streaming or YouTube or whatever as their day job. Certainly I'm right there with you. If it's over 3 hours, I'm absolutely never going near it. Sorry, like that's just them's the breaks.
There's got to be limits for that.
How about your favorite speedrun to watch that you have no plans to run yourself? You're never going to run it, but you love watching it.
I've always enjoyed watching Tetris at GDQs.
Oh yeah,
or at speedrunning marathons. Mm-hmm. I don't really see myself speedrunning Tetris, but I just think the level of skill that a lot of these runners express is just unbelievably cool. It's always such a great experience watching those runs. It's like, how can they think so fast and move those pieces so fast and get these amazing games and complete these really skill requiring speed runs? It's amazing. I love watching Tetris runs.
Now, you've had the opportunity to take quite a few games to the GDQ stage. I believe the answer so far is 7. You'll be adding an 8th one to that, presumably, at SGDQ 2021. But I still have to ask anyway, is there another speed game that you feel like if you could be given a freebie, let's say the 9th one is free, what game are you taking to the GDQ stage?
Instant answer, OneShot.
OneShot.
That's a game I've been submitting to GDQs for a few times now. Mm-hmm. And I that's the game I wanted most out of all my submissions, and was OneShot. It's a game I'm really passionate about, and it's this 2D RPG that breaks the fourth wall And for such a simple game, it has a lot of cool tech to it, like fast travel warping, instant tech smashing. There's even a skip in the game where you can go through a barrier if you close the game at a certain point. It's very meta, and I think it's one of the more unique 2D adventure games that I've ever seen, and I would love to have the opportunity to play at GDQ. I just recently ran it at Mid-Spring Speed Fling. I got that name right.
Yeah,
and that was a really fun experience.
That was one of the VODs that you had sent me, and certainly I think it seemed like the most recent of the VODs that I think I ended up watching. No, you were definitely. I mean, I don't want to say that they're not every speedrunner is an advocate for the game they're running, but you were definitely trying to sell that game. I could tell.
Yeah, I love OneShot. I would love to have the honor of playing it at GDQ.
So, a question I wanted to ask you now. You have an interesting cross section of games that you had sent me that you've done at events like GDQs, and I know in your bio. I think you have it kind of summed up. Your sales pitch, I guess, for your brand is 3D platformers and driving games. I think
driving games.
And I wanted to ask if you could describe for me the sort of the appeal of speedrunning for you that causes you to arrive at that collection of games, because that was kind of one of the things I was looking at, because I noticed that a lot of the driving games, for example, were very interesting, like the ones that I had watched, between Slipstream and Jelly Drift and Densha de D. It was this interesting cross section of driving racing games. Along with the platformers, and of course some things that are outside of that. OneShot doesn't really fit into either of those buckets so much. Do you feel like there is a certain point or appeal of speedrunning to you that kind of identifies what you're into?
The two genres, like 3D platformers and driving games, those are games that I'm just into in general.
Mm-hmm.
I think driving games, for example, they make really good speed runs because a lot of them don't have that many glitches. So it's just you driving the car pretty much. Stuff like Jelly Drift, you're just driving the car. Yeah, there's checkpoint warping and some other tricks, but it's just that. And it's a very pure form of speedrunning that I think ties back into my days of Forza when I was doing those time trials.
Right.
I love doing that. And doing speedruns of games like that capture that same energy, it kind of reminds me of that. And it highlights that interest of mine. As for 3D platformers, those are games that are more glitch heavy, more broken, require different you to do strats, how to bounce clips, cool stuff like that, stuff that you may not see too often in a racing game. And it's fun when games have really good movement, like a Hat in Time. And it's just two different genres of games that I feel like complement each other so well for me. Because if I speedrun a driving game for a while and I get bored of it, I can play a 3D platformer, which is a totally different experience.
No, I think that's a good call too. Is that part of it for you is the ability to play the one off the other. Is that if you are for whatever reason exhausted with one, I mean, it is, as you say, a very different experience, often for reasons that are common to the genre, and also you were interested in it from the get go anyway. So. No, that makes sense. I think that's definitely kind of presents a full picture of your repertoire. Speaking of working on the repertoire, one of the things I like to cover regularly here is the fact that speedrunning often involves a lot of repetitive strain or stress. And I wanted to ask, is there anything that you do from a health perspective as a preventative measure to avoid damage to, hands, wrist, back, anything like that?
I think that's a wonderful question to ask, and that's something that is not talked about nearly enough. I make sure that I don't do it as often as I should, but I make sure to do hand stretches, especially if I'm gaming for a while. I think that's really important. One of the best things you can do. There's a lot of tutorials for hand stretches online that are easy to access and are helpful to do. It's also important to maintain good posture as well. If you're sitting in a chair, make sure your back is straight and you're not hunched over, which is easy for me to do when I'm sitting for a long time. And if you're able to, you can also stand at your desk if you have a standing desk. That's what I'm currently doing, and it helps a lot make sure that I'm not sitting all day and that I'm also having good posture. It's easier that way. But yeah, I think it's important to be mindful of that stuff, because it can do damage to your body, very serious damage over time. And then once you realize it, it could be too late.
Right. I mean, that's the other thing, is that, hopefully anyone who is putting themselves in that situation, not saying that like you're being negligent, but at the first sign of pain, like certainly do notice that. Hopefully it doesn't mean it's too late to turn back from that. Hopefully, again, doing stretches already is, as you recommend, is great advice. I think that's certainly my approach at the ripe old age of 33. I just listen to what my body tells me, and usually that's the solid way to go. To pay attention to those things. And certainly it sounds like you already have a very good setup, in terms of providing yourself with, the opportunities to stretch, to stand up, to be standing. So that's great. That's certainly, I like to hear that. Sometimes I do ask, runners who are on the younger side, and they're like, I don't really do anything yet. And I'm like, well, don't worry about it. Hopefully that means there's nothing bad happening, but take notice for the future, of course. Related, I do like to ask, and I think this is relevant to your interest, because you got a number of console runs on here, and I think also, even while listening to some of the runs that you were doing on PC, seemed apparent you were using pads sometimes, and so I do like to ask, do you have takes when it comes to favorite and least favorite controllers?
Oh, well, my favorite's always going to be Xbox One. Okay. That Xbox One controllers are by far the most comfortable. It feels so natural in my hands. Compared to a DualShock 4, it's much more comfortable than the previous DualShocks, but it doesn't quite compete with the Xbox One pad for me. One controller that I don't really like is the GameCube controller, mainly because of the grips. It just feels kind of awkward to hold for extended periods of time. It's not that comfortable. It's a very versatile controller, yes, but in terms of ergonomics, I think controllers have evolved over the years very, very well. With the Xbox One controller, even newer offerings from Nintendo, like the Switch Pro controller. I remember holding one of those once at a store kiosk, and I thought it was pretty comfortable.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how they evolved. I definitely get the Xbox One controller as a frequent favorite. There is no universal take on the DualShocks. I've heard of everything at this point. I think every single version of DualShock people have identified as their favorite or least favorite, which is really, really wild to me. GameCube, of course, is always a lightning rod. Although what's interesting, I think, about the GameCube is I would tend to agree with you in terms of, I got one right here, that nice. The grips they're very narrow, which I think is something that ends up being uncomfortable over time.
That's exactly it.
I think the other thing, though, is that I'm really not a fan of the depressible shoulder buttons. Do you have like a preference on shoulder buttons, triggers, or things like that, or?
Yeah, the GameCube ones are quite strange, because there's not a whole lot of, like, you can push it down quite a lot, and then you have the bump, which is the actual like digital press of the button compared to the analog. But yeah, Xbox One, the triggers on those are good. And even especially if you play a game that uses the vibration motors in those, it could be a really cool experience.
And of course, the other thing, it depends on what games you're playing, but the GameCube D-pad is like a sin against nature. I really,
yeah, not a fan of it.
Yeah, not a fan. Now, honestly, I think that's one of the biggest nice things about the Xbox One controller to me is for a long time everyone would say the 360 D-pad was bad, and the Xbox One D-pad is just night and day compared to it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's better in every way, pretty much.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, well let's keep going forward here. I always try to make call a shot about what someone else might be doing besides speedrunning stuff. And I have a hunch. I have nothing to base this hunch on. I was hoping it would come up while watching your runs, and it did not come up. Do you do any music stuff?
I don't.
You don't?
No.
Damn it.
I played a few instruments back in middle school a little bit.
All right. Well, I'll have to lose a bet with myself over that one. I tried. I tried. It sometimes happens with, I think, speedrunning, is that you see overlaps with certain communities. with music, fighting games, there are a lot of the common ones that I'll see. And so I was just trying to call that shot, and it didn't work out. Let's move to another hardware related question though. Before we get to talking about more of the individual games, some of the games that you've run are console games, and that comes with we already talked about capture stuff, but even besides capture stuff, playing older consoles in the modern day has a lot of strings attached to it. And I was curious, have you gotten into any of the converters, upscalers? Have you involved yourself in any of that, or do you stay far away from that stuff?
I have not. I really don't play consoles at all anymore. I play everything on my computer, but I know a lot about them because I watch channels like My Life in Gaming, which do extensive coverage of that. And I find that really fascinating, how well the video signal from an old console can look so clear and crisp and emulator-like. I have always thought that was interesting, but I don't. Even if I did play consoles or did runs of stuff on consoles, it's just so expensive.
Sure. Oh yeah, it is. I don't blame you.
It is. Like, they're amazing products. Like, you can get amazing results, but at the time, like, even with the stuff like the OSSC, which is a bit cheaper compared to the FrameMeister, which is like $300-$400.
Oh, yeah, that's FrameMeisters.
No, that's like out of reach for most people.
Yeah,
no, I find that interesting from a distance.
Part of the reason I bring it up is because I'm concerned. Like, one of the things, I guess I am more on the cheaper side. I will confess here. Like, most of my converters are like $30 converters that are cheap and probably don't have good lag and latency. Don't tell anyone. I still speedrun with them. No one's caught me yet. But I think I appreciate the quality and clarity of the signal. Documented very well by just some of the YouTubers that you mentioned. But I definitely I'm just curious to see what people are actually using, because I want to get that snapshot, because I don't want to give people the idea that you have to have an OSSC or a RetroTink or something like to be a runner. I mean, it can be a nice thing. Nice things are nice to have, which is, I'm not trying to shame anyone for having nice things. But at the same time, I think some weeks ago I had Joester98 on, who's like a big Pac-Man World Crash to Insanity runner. And Joe is on the old stuff. He is using a Dazzle he's had for 10 years. And, and he's a top runner. He is 10,000 attempts in Pac-Man World. Didn't use anything fancy. Now, maybe having a CRT in the space for a CRT is a luxury. That might be a discussion on its own. But, part of the reason I like to catalog this information is just so people can know, like, this person speedruns and this is what they do. And so it's useful to me. Right now, obviously, you're doing everything on PC, and it's probably also, being a student, it's easier, to handle
so
that
much
way.
easier.
Yeah.
So much easier just to have one device for all the gaming stuff.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I can tell you, I'm getting really into optical drive emulators. So like I have like a whole home office, and it's just the nightmare of consoles with like opened up things right now. But again, I do that for fun because I like exploring old game libraries. That is certainly not in any way a requirement to to do speedruns or anything. Let's get into some games. We got a lot of games to talk about, a lot of games that I want to ask questions about. And we're going to start off with a topic that is near and dear to my heart, which are old 6th generation console licensed games. Ed, and Eddie, The Misadventures. Was this a game that you had played as a kid? How did you learn about this game?
I've always loved the TV show Ed, and Eddie. It's my favorite cartoon from that era, and of course I had to have the game. God, I spent a lot of time playing it when I was a kid. It's a really cool game because it immerses you in the world of that show so well. Like the art style and the way things looked and were laid out, very, very like the show. And that was a game that I picked up pretty early into my speedrunning career, I would say. A little bit after the whole monkey ball stuff. And at the time, there wasn't really much of a community for it, from what I remember. There was mainly Sponge Cube, who was one of the main active runners of the game. And yeah, it's just, that was such a fun experience. And it ended up being my first ever marathon run. I ran it at the very first Calithon, which was my first ever speedrunning marathon, like in-person showcase. So that game means a lot to me because of that. It was very definitive for speedrunning for me.
So, I know. So that's interesting that it was your first marathon appearance. I think this ends up being, was this the first one that you did? Was this SGDQ 2016? Was this the?
That was my first GDQ run.
Okay. No, that's, I mean, it was, and as you said, the game emulates the style so very well. Now, and you ended up doing any percent at both of these. And actually, I'm really impressed. One of the things I noticed, you've been doing speedrunning now for, well over, I'm going to say 5+ years. You still have a lot of the top times in these games. Like you have the top time for any percent in this game, and that is stuck around. That is, it says 4 years old in SRC. Was that just like, did you just get like a really good run, or did it not be so active after you were done with it? Like, I'm kind of curious if there's a story there.
That's a good question. After my GEQ run, that's when the game really fell off. That's when the community started to fade away and people were starting to do other things. There's still from what I understand, there's still a small group of people who run the game from time to time. But yeah, that record that I set, that 20-minute, 57-second time that I set, it was such a good run. Of course, there were a few things I could have done better, but I'm very proud of that run, and I knew at that moment that I would be content not running that category anymore because I'm proud of that time. That's my skill ceiling. But yeah, like I worked really hard to optimize that game, and even with a lot of the games I played, like Hat in Time Beta, Misadventures, another one, R4 Ridge Racer Type 4. That's an old game that I ran 2016, and I still have the world record for it, even with some competition.
A decision that I wanted to ask about. So I'm looking at the leaderboard, the 90% leaderboard, and it is the PC version is pretty clearly the dominant version. But, and I think this was explained during the commentary for one of the videos I watched, apparently the PC version is not a good idea to run at marathons. What prompted you to make the decision to say, I'm going to do GameCube at marathons?
So the PC version of the game, it's not that good of a port, and like the process of like moving the files around from different computers, that really scared me because some runners had their computers bricked because of the DRM that the game ships with. And if you're careful about removing that, then that could easily like destroy your Windows install. That's exactly what happened with me, and yeah, I was just terrified of something going wrong. So I was like, okay, I'm going to play on GameCube. I'm going to play it safe. It's the only thing different is that there's longer loading times. I'm still showing off the same run, more or less.
Man, so for people who haven't run a PC game at a live Games Done Quick event, I want to make it clear to folks that the typical arrangement is that you're using GDQ's computers and you're installing the game on their computer. And so I'm just imagining now a scenario in which you bricked one of the computers at the site with Ed, and Eddie the Misadventures.
Oh, I would not want that to happen to me.
On your first run at a GDQ event?
Not a good first impression, I'd say.
Oh man, that would have been something. Probably the responsible decision that you guys made to do the GameCube version.
I played it safe and it worked out.
Yeah.
It's still a good showcase.
Has this been one that you've revisited much at all? You mentioned that the record has stood, but of course that doesn't mean you can't play the game just because you aren't going for a top time. Have you revisited it all, or? Not
recently, no. I've 100% of the game before, and I just haven't really had a want to go back. But I still love the game a lot. And it makes me happy to see that people are still picking it up and playing it from time to time. It's a very underrated licensed game. People talk a lot about the SpongeBob games, which are great, but there's also some other lesser known licensed games that from that era that are really, really cool and worth playing, even casually.
Do you have any particular that you're thinking of when you're saying that?
There's Ed, and Eddie. I don't remember if I played any other licensed games. like TV shows. Yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah, no, I mean that's fair. Certainly, as you mentioned, Battle for Bikini Bottom is probably the big one. I
love that game.
I've already mentioned Jaxler once, who of course has played some of the other SpongeBob games, like Truth or Square, which I think Truth or Square is actually also isn't Truth or Square also on the 2021 list? Did I imagine
it
that?
is? It is. I was so happy to see that.
Excellent. Yeah. Again, shout outs to Jaxler.
I played that one for the 12-hour challenge.
Oh,
and I loved it. It's a really great run, and it's well deserving of being in GDQ. I'm so excited to see Jaxler run it.
All right, so we already talked a little bit about road trip adventure. We talked about it. So it was in fact a childhood game. You got to tell the story of how you sort of happened upon it via the wonders of unclear naming conventions, and your parent making a very, very reasonable I don't even know if I'd call it a mistake, just sort of like accident.
It's an accident, yeah.
How about the story of getting into this as a speedrun? What made you pick it up as a speedrun? Were other people speedrunning? What's the story?
I think, if I remember this right, I stumbled across the game on YouTube after many, many years of not playing it. And I think this was when I was getting into speedrunning, or somewhere around that time frame. And I was like, this would be a cool game to speedrun. So I looked it up on speedrun.com, and I saw that there were a few runs of it. And there's a very small community for it at the time. And that's when I learned Any%, started running that and interacting with its community, and that was such a positive experience.
When you learned Any%, was the gambling already a part of the route?
Yes.
It was.
Yeah. Like, there's no way to get around the gambling part, because it gives you so much money, and you could use that to upgrade your car, and you need all the speed you can get for the final race with those jet rocket boosters and various other upgrades we applied to the car. The cool thing about that, the task of the game actually skips the gambling. And it does that by having this frame perfect final race. The final boss of the game is where you have a one-on-one race. And what they do is so cool. They have the opponent basically push you along the track. You don't have nearly the speed you need to go around it yourself and also win. But if you just time your steering inputs, gas and brake perfectly, you can have him push you all the way, like all 3 laps to the finish. Not reasonable at all for an RTA run.
Wow.
But yeah, for actual human beings, you got to do the gambling in the game.
So in that case, was most of the route fully formed at the time that you were getting into that run, or were there still some tricks being found?
I believe it was mostly solidified. The one category that did see development was the 100 stamp, which is the game's 100% run. That was shortened quite a bit since I had started running the game. A few other runners came into the scene and really helped to bring that down due to routing improvements mostly. And that category saw a lot of growth. And I think the world record is almost to the sub 3 hour mark, which is really, really impressive considering how much stuff you have to do. It's an open world RPG, and you have to do 100 different side quests. It's a lot to manage and keep track of.
Now, this is another game where you've also managed to hold on to the Any% for what SRC says is 4 years old. And it sounds like, I'm guessing that the story here is that this is kind of a similar thing where it's just you got all the difficult tricks. You got the gambling first try, etc.
Oh yeah, it was really good run. It will be pretty hard to beat that time just because of how many things went right. And that's just not me bragging, really. There's not really that much room left. But if someone wanted to, they could absolutely beat it. I think there was a runner who came into the scene a little bit after I got that record, and they got really close to my world record. But they didn't end up. They weren't able to beat it, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's always kind of sad to look at run comments that are like, I'm going to come back and improve this. The second place run comment is just a little more.
Is that what the actual comment was?
Yeah. The second place, it's like, because maybe your time is 12:28, and the second place time is 12:45, and the run comment for the 12:45 run is a little more.
Oh,
Yeah.
I would love to see someone beat my world record. Like it doesn't upset me when that happens.
Oh, no,
I love seeing people really get into these speed games and end up beating my time. It's motivating, and it's also cool to see their success as well. It's I'm totally cool with that. I want to see people beat my times.
So this game has a bunch of really what I would call show-stopping tricks. Like I was really really entertained by watching this speedrun, both the 80% run as well as I think you also sent me a 20 stamps run as well. And I wanted to ask if you had a favorite trick among because there's a bunch of things that happen in the game, a bunch of very funny techniques. Do you have a favorite one where you're like, yeah, this is the one that I'm really here to show off?
The best trick in Road Trip Adventure is by far the gate skip at the very end of the game. Basically, what you do for the final boss, you have to enter this big mansion, and it's locked behind a gate, and you can't open the gate until you complete all of the championship races, which take forever. I think there's a category that does all the races and skips the gambling portion of the game, and that's about an hour long, which is a lot more than the 12 minutes you see in that category. So basically what the skip does, oh my god, it's so cool. You position this AI car so it's touching the gate, and you ram into the corner of the two. So you're hitting the gate and the car at the same exact frame. And when you do this, you get backwards momentum storage, and you just fly away backwards into the distance. You actually fly away so far that the map loops itself. So you spawn at the opposite end of the map, and you just fly into the loading zone of the mansion, which is on the other side of the gate. So it's like you're flying all the way around the world and back to the mansion to get into that loading zone. It is one of the coolest tricks, I think, in any speed game. And I had a lot of fun showing that off.
I'm such a huge fan of tricks that loop the coordinate system of a 3D game. I also run some of the early Armored Core games. Are you familiar with Armored Core at all?
I have not. What's that about?
Well, you may have heard of From Software, right? You know them.
Mm-hmm.
Their biggest series of games. I say biggest. Biggest is probably not true anymore. That's probably the Souls games. The games that they've made the most Armored Core games. That's still a true statement. They've made more Armored Core games than they ever made Souls games. It was a mech series, started on PS1. In the early Armored Core games, you get out of bounds. The coordinate system loops. And there's one particular mission where you can fire a grenade out into space, and the grenade will loop through space to destroy something on the opposite end of the level and win the mission instantly. So I'm just a huge fan of that. And when I saw that happen, like when I saw it flying backwards, I was like, well, that's not the right direction unless, and then of course it looped the coordinate system. And I was like, yes, perfect. Excellent. I was very pleased. Okay, well, let's we got plenty of games to talk about here. I wanted to ask, I think I might have mentioned this before we started the podcast proper. But one of the games that you showed off at SGDQ 2018 was Densha de D Lightning Stage. There is I feel like a bit of setup for this game. I'm gonna let you explain what this game is.
Where do I begin? It's this really, really cool racing game, but it doesn't involve cars. It actually involves passenger trains, specifically passenger trains in Japan that you'd often take to commute to work or around the areas. And it's this really intense racing game based on the Initial D manga and anime series. So it has the Eurobeat and it has all the characters and the same story as Initial D, but instead of racing cars, they race trains. And there's a lot of chaos that happens, multi-track drifting, lots of cool Eurobeat in the background. And it's it's such a bizarre game, but I love it so much.
So now, is this would it be correct to call this game an indie game? Because this is based on the Densha de D, if I understand right, is a parody doujin of Initial D.
Exactly, yeah.
And then this is a game based on that parody.
Yep, exactly. And the game was developed by one person, from what I understand. So you could consider it also an indie game, but it's also a Dojin game based on the Dojin manga parody series.
Right. I mean, I'm going to assume that the people who understand the term Dojin can run with it. My understanding that Dojin usually kind of means sort of, self-published is kind of maybe one way to put it, or
yeah, exactly. It refers to all types of self-published works.
Right.
All types.
So, I had a question specifically about this video that I watched, about this run. Is there a story to you and your couch being dressed up?
Well, yeah, we wanted to resemble the characters in the game, the train drivers, and they're all wearing suits. So we all coordinated that, and it makes the run stand out.
No, certainly
it's fun. It's fun to dress up like that.
No, it was fun. It was fun too. This was also, I think, the first one that I watched that had the boiks in it, and I was like, oh, wait a second, I recognize that person. I see what's going on here. So with this game, I think you were just doing the any percent category. I was actually kind of impressed with the number of tricks going on in this one as well. I'm going to throw the same question at you that I did with Road Trip Adventure. Is there a favorite trick in this game?
Let's see. There's a trick that applies to most of the races, which is the speed boosting you do. And if you're able to play well enough, you can actually get in front of the opponent when you're not supposed to. All the races are heavily scripted, but if you manage to break that script, you can go really fast and complete the stages much faster than intended. That's like the main thing that makes it such a short speedrun too. It skips a lot of the dialogue and little cutscenes that play, and those things add up over time. Like the third race in the game where you battle Shingo, there's a lot of stuff that's skipped, and you go extremely fast and get to the finish in record time.
See, I wanted to ask that question first because normally I would ask, how did you end up speedrunning it? But I wanted to get that one out of the way because I feel like we might have stumbled into one of the tricks there, and I wanted to highlight the trick before asking that. But when in the commentary, I think there was some talk about how you got into speedrunning this through like a blind race or something. How did you end up speedrunning this?
I've known about the game for a while, and I found out through it on YouTube. And I was like, as a big fan of Initial D, I was like, what on earth is this? It's this racing game with trains, and there's a manga series with it that has like this well-drawn art that resembles the Initial D manga. Is like, what the heck is this? And and with the help of the community, I was able to. We did blind races of the various Densha de D games that helped to get us into the various games. And yeah, that was a fun way of doing the blind races. Are always a fun way to experience speed games or games for the first time with friends. But yeah, it was mainly YouTube and like, oh wow, this game is so cool. I wanna play it for myself. It looks like it could be a fun speed run perhaps. And then that's when stuff started getting found and the games became broken. And it's like, oh my god, this is awesome.
Yeah, because I remember part of the story from the one video was that as you mentioned, the races are very heavily scripted, and so I think there is an expectation for the player to follow story cues, but if the language is Japanese, that can make it hard to follow the cues.
Exactly. We ran into that issue with Lightning Stage. We couldn't figure out how to beat the last race because you had to apply the emergency brake at a very specific point. And you have to do it in like the same way that's in the Initial D race. You're reenacting the race. And if you don't know what to do, or if it's not made clear, then you're just going to fail the race and you might not know why. So with the help of Google Translate, we were able to figure that out. Yeah, stuff like that. It's interesting.
But of course, the version that y'all ended up running at AGD 2018 was a translated version, right? The text on screen was English. Did you guys have a hand in making that happen, or was that just sort of separately? Someone was doing I'm going to call it fan translation, but just the translation.
Yeah, I wasn't involved with that process, but what happened is that we reached out to a translator who offered to translate the game into English, and they did a really good job. Their name was Enforza, and then it was implemented into the game by one of the runners. And like the way that was done, you had to use Excel to look at these text files and replace the text. I don't know exactly how that works, but it's like, it's so strange. But yeah, that was a really cool thing that was done, because like having the game in English, it makes it a better experience for people who speak English, which GDQ, yeah, it's like that was important that was done. The game never got an official English translation. It's only in Japanese currently.
So I wanted to ask, you've already mentioned, of course, there are other Densha de D games. And you had previously had an interest in Initial D, and so I did want to inquire, how did that come about? Because Initial D is like, I feel like certain parts of Initial D have like infused in the culture, especially the Eurobeat songs. A lot of people will know the music. They'll know the music even if they don't know that Initial D is part of what popularized it. How did you get into Initial D stuff?
I think, I was in middle school at the time. I was into anime. I always liked cars, and I was playing Forza Motorsport. And I think one of my friends were discussing Initial D, and I was like, "Oh, what's that? Oh, it's this cool anime about car racing." And of course, that's like a perfect blend of my interest in anime, my interest in cars, and like, that still is my favorite anime to this day because it's that perfect blend for me.
And so you've even done speedruns of some Initial D games, right?
Yeah, I did runs of Initial D on the PlayStation 1, which is quite the meme-filled adventure because of the CGI in it. And then there's also Initial D Special Stage for the PlayStation 2, which is a bit of a more serious game, and I had fun with that as well. It's cool things you can do, ways to go fast.
Have you ever had the opportunity to interact with any Initial D arcade cabs?
Yes. So at GDQs, they bring, or they have brought in the past, they've brought Initial D Arcade Stage 8 and Arcade Stage 0 to the event. So I would spend a lot of time playing those cabinets. And every time I go to the Round 1 arcades, I do check out the Initial D cabinets they have there, as well as the Wonga and Midnight Maximum Tune cabinets, which is a different racing game series. But yeah, I love the Initial D arcade games. They're extremely fun.
Yeah,
spent a lot of time on those at GDQs.
No, they're really good. I think if I recall right, there was a period of time where I think some of the arcade cabs that went to MagFest. Do you know what MagFest is?
Yeah, I went there before. Yeah.
Well, there you go. Maybe we're even at the same MagFest at a period of time. I've gone to a few of those.
Yeah, I went to the one in 2018.
Okay, yeah, we would have both been there. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
I might have been dead that weekend, though. I might have been spreading plague. Don't tell anyone. I forget which one that was. But was that a snowy one? Do you recall?
It was. I think so.
100%. Yeah.
Very cold outside.
Yeah, I was extremely dead. I think I spent most of that watching the bands in the big room from the balcony. Anyway, but at a certain events, I had the opportunity to try the Initial D arcade cabs, and they were always very cool. Like, I'm not a huge driving game fan, but I'm definitely impressed with the arcade cabinet. And I'm glad that you had the opportunity to do that. I'm going to go ahead and sneak in Amerlin's question here from chat. Did you also do a gum tape death match at a GDQ? I don't know what that is. Can you give me context?
Yes. So it was at... I know we did it for the tournament we did at AGDQ 2019, I want to say 2018, one of the tournaments. The gum tape death match, if you don't know, is an Initial D thing.
Okay.
Where you use duct tape and you tape your right hand to the steering wheel. So you're turning with one hand and shifting with your left hand because the car is a right-hand drive.
Okay.
So I think for one of the final top races, we had a bonus round where we would actually tape our hands to the steering wheel and race like that. We couldn't detach our hand from the steering wheel. So if you turn it around all the way, you'd be twisting your wrist in really weird ways. And that definitely made it more interesting of a match. But yeah, it was a reference to that moment in the anime where the protagonist did that with a real car.
Okay.
And it's dangerous. Don't do that in real life.
Don't do that.
If you're playing an arcade game, as long as you don't hurt your wrist or anything, go for it.
Yeah, as long as like the owner of the cab is okay with it. I don't know if the tape will leave any residue. Yeah.
No, they were totally fine with it.
Okay.
We got permission.
Did they understand why you're doing that? I hope. I mean,
yeah, I would presume they did.
Okay. I wasn't sure if that was like if it was a defining moment of the anime, then they would probably get the reference. I guess.
Yeah.
Good. I'm glad I dived into Initial D stuff there. I had a sense that there were some stories there, and so that was good to dig into. Speaking of things where there must be stories, and I must ask about them. I think when I was like scoping out potential guests, and I'm like, what kind of runs have they done? If I were going to have them on the podcast, what am I going to see? And I looked at, I went to GDQ VODs, typed in Konasumi, and I looked and I saw the names of the games, and I recognized some of them. And I saw Minor Ultra Adventures. Like, what is this? And I opened the video, and I was like, this is sublime. This is art. I must know more. Where did you find this? What is this?
It was a Steam recommendation. Steam recommended the game to me because I think I played a Hat in Time. So I was like, hey, you like a Hat in Time? Check out this 3D platformer here, which is of lower quality. But I was like, oh my God, what is this? What is this game?
How much did you pay?
Oh, I don't know. It must have been like a few dollars.
Okay.
So not that expensive.
No.
But yeah, it's like, I was like, what the heck is this? It's made in Blender game engine. Blender, the 3D modeling software. You never hear of games being made in it. It's a 3D platform with tank controls and a 3D platformer. So it's like, it's such a unique game in that regard.
Tank controls.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah, it's almost like you're steering a car or a tank. You can pivot in place, and yeah, that's like definitely one of the strangest games I've ever done speedruns of. And the marathon I did was my best marathon performance. That run had a lot of hype with it.
No,
it's the most viewed run as well.
Oh yeah, interesting. Yeah, there's a lot of energy. Sorry, I'm just looking at it on Steam now, and so it is still on Steam, but you have to get the Minorino director's cut, which was released in December 2019. But then you can buy Minor Ultra Adventures, which was released in 2014 as DLC for the base game. Oh, no, wait, this doesn't make any sense. No, it was released in 2020, the DLC's version. But I guess it's Ultra Adventures. It's Minorino Classic. So I think they made an update, and they're allowing you to buy the classic version as DLC. Sorry, I got very distracted by this. I don't know if you're looking at it all as well, but
I've been aware of this.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a weird situation because after my GDQ run, the developer got banned from Steam, and he's republished the games under a different label, which he's not supposed to do. I don't condone that.
Oh.
But
wait.
So the way he re-released the games it's strange. Like, right? You have the classic edition and director's cut, which I think has a few more things added to it. But I heard it's pretty buggy. But yeah, God, it's such a weird story.
Yeah. Do you know why the developer was banned? Is it just because it was considered low quality, or
I think he published games that broke the terms of service.
Okay.
I think they might have been a little too sexual, if I remember right.
Oh, so it wasn't minor. Was it?
No, it had nothing to do with Minor Ultra Adventures. It's like, just the stuff he did after that got him removed from Steam.
All right, I was like, was there some symbolism to Minor Ultra Adventures that I did not pick up on? No.
No. It's unrelated to that game.
So with this game, then you saw it via Steam recommendation. How did you make the jump from seeing it looks kind of funny, you're now speedrunning it?
Let's see. Yeah, memory's a little bit fuzzy on this one, but I remember playing the game casually. I beat the game casually, and I just knew I had to speedrun it. I don't think there was much of a community around at the time, if I remember right. But as time went on, as I ran the game more, but before GDQ, of course, that's when more people started joining that scene and began running the game. And much like with the other obscure games I've ran, as soon as I did the GDQ run, it just dropped off completely in terms of runner activity. And it doesn't help that the game, it was like republished in weird ways, and it's just more complicated to get into, really.
Sure, yeah. And I'm looking at the leaderboard now, and there's like the classic director's cut, split up and everything.
Yeah.
But, so you mentioned wait, just maybe I missed it. Were there other people running this before you got into it?
I'm not totally sure on that one. There might have been, I think there was a few, if I remember right. A small handful of people.
Okay. So there was like a leaderboard, but it wasn't quite.
Yeah. Yeah, there was like, I know at least maybe one or two people, but there was probably a handful of them that were running the game beforehand.
Interesting. So, but were the tricks all found when you showed up, or did the run develop from that point?
I believe most of it was already established. Like the first trick in the game, the helicopter trick with Mike Wazowski, that one was already found.
Very good.
Best trick in the game, I'd say. Mm-hmm. But the run besides that, it's remained the same. The levels are linear. There's not that much you could do to really speed things up, aside from what was already found. So from there, what I was doing is just optimizing my times and doing runs.
I don't know which leaderboard moderator helped me create this picture, but I just really love that if you go to the leaderboard for this, there's any percent, as I mentioned, there are subcategories for classic and director's cut, and there's like a healthy amount. There's 23 in classic and 11 in director's cut. Like pretty good for a random janky game leaderboard. The next category is intended route. It's completely empty. Just
I was unaware that this was even a thing. This must have been added after
presumably, but it was just added at some point. I guess maybe someone expressed interest. I'm not going to speculate on why, but it's as a despair, look upon my works, ye mighty. Ozymandias, like just kind of funny to see this left here like this with a healthy number of any percent runners and nothing on intended route, right? Not glitchless, not no major glitches, intended route.
Yeah. I would presume that just skip, you avoid doing the skips that really break the level design. I would say like the first level you do a huge sequence break, third level huge sequence break there, and maybe even for the beanstalk level perhaps. Oh yeah, even on stage 4. So it's like you're doing the whole game in the intended route, as it would say in the category name. That's fascinating. I had no idea about this.
Well, it's there for anyone. It's not expensive on Steam. I gotta tell you, you can play the game legally. Maybe the developer can't publish the game legally, or by Steam's terms of service, but you can pay the developer 99 cents to get the game. Oh my! All right. Well, I'm glad I got the story about that. That was as good as I hoped it would be. Another game that seems more polished, but I still want to know how you got into, is Omnibus, which is another kind of quirky driving game. I think this is from SGDQ 2017 is the run that I watched. But again, this is not a normal driving game. This is a little more of a physics-based puzzler is what I would call it. How did you get into this one?
I found it on Steam. It's a Devolver digital title, and because I play a lot of racing games and driving games, it appeared in my recommended. I was like, what's this Omnibus game? It's about this bus. It looks like a PlayStation 1 game, and it's kind of short. I always looked at it with speedrunning in mind. It looked like a really short game. And I had my eye on it for a while, and then I bought it when it went on sale, and I learned the run for it. And that was really fun.
Was it were other people doing runs of the game, or?
I think so. If memory serves me right, there were other people running it, but not that very many people. The community has always remained really small.
Yeah.
Or actually, looking at it now, no. I think, the 2 other people on the leaderboard, those 2 are my friends, and they found out about the game through me.
Okay.
So, I feel pretty confident saying I was the first one to get into Omnibus and kind of pioneer that speedrun.
Did you end up discovering? Because watching, to me, it seemed like it was mostly intended strats that you were using. Were there any sort of surprising revelations about corners you're able to cut in the game? Because it seemed like pretty straightforward.
Yeah. Okay. One big thing is that in the very final world of the game, each world of Omnibus has a bunch of missions you can do. Turns out for the last world, I don't think I figured this out at first. You can just skip to the final boss. You're not required to actually do any of the missions. And it's like when I realized that, it's like, whoa, this saves a bunch of time and we didn't even know about it.
It's
That's
always
the big thing.
Yeah, it's always the basic knowledge, especially when you're the first person to a game. It's that sort of thing where it can be really hard to say, what do I actually need to do to get to the end of the game? Like I've mentioned now several times, Teardown. When we were all first doing full game speedruns of that game in like the first month, none of us bothered to actually see if we could skip any missions. And there were 2 missions that we just didn't have to do that we were all doing.
Yeah. Same thing with Omnibus. It's like you expect to be required to do all the missions in the world to get to the final boss because that's how most games operate. Turns out it's not always the case. Like with Omnibus.
Now, this was a game. One thing I picked up from listening to the commentary was that there were times when it was advantageous to use both keyboard and controller. Did I understand that right? Was there some kind of control shenanigans going on here, if you recall?
Yeah, I remember switching over to keyboard for certain parts of the game. I think one of them was the mission where you drive up this huge tower, and it's this Donkey Kong style mission where you have this big monkey at the top who's throwing cars down at you. And using the keyboard is better for that mission because you can be more precise with it. You can have smaller turning inputs, which are needed because the sensitivity of the bus steering is so high. Yeah, stuff like that. That's where I would switch controllers, but usually I would prefer playing on my Xbox One controller. It's just more comfortable, feels more natural, but sometimes I gotta switch over for the sake of safety and speed.
Yeah, no, it was interesting to see. Just I always find that when people start using multiple devices in a speedrun, there's usually a major reason to do so, because otherwise, you're interfering with kind of providing a consistent flow of inputs, and to see the rationale behind that can be very revealing about kind of what's important for the game. Let's move on to another game. So, in the vein of racing games, because I noticed this when I was watching through. I saw Road Trip Adventure, Omnibus, and I was like, okay, we're just playing weird driving games. Everything, the Densha de D, we're all weird stuff. One that was much more traditional and much more normal was Slipstream. I think there were two videos of Slipstream I watched. I had watched the Battle Royale, talking about Battle Royale in 2019. So there's a lot of very, very timely humor in that run. And then also there was a Cannonball max settings race from SGDQ 2019. I wanted to ask, so the max settings, the category name Cannonball max settings, for that refers to the maximum traffic. What was the Cannonball part of it? Or is that also the same thing?
So the Cannonball, that's where you go through every track in the game back to back without stopping. And max settings, that would max out the amount of tracks you get, because if you move it to a number less than I think it was 20 tracks we did, it would just be randomized.
Yeah, okay.
But we can make sure we get all 20 by maximizing that. There's also traffic that was maximized as well. That was the other setting that was maxed out. So it made it more fun because you'd have to weave your way around traffic, which could be really hard to do in Slipstream and results in pretty big time loss if you hit a car, for example.
So with this game, I think, I want to say in one of the videos, maybe it was the Calathon one, the Battle Royale one, But I think did you mention this was a game that you discovered as a Kickstarter game?
No. I found out about it, I think, the day it came out or a little before it came out. I had my eye on it for a little bit, but I don't think I knew about it during the Kickstarter era.
Okay.
But it was a Kickstarter game, and it was successful. It was in development for quite a long time, and the end product, a lot of people were happy with it.
Good. I wanted to ask, and this is probably going to get a no. Had you ever heard of a Kickstarter game which did not end in a successful product called Drift Stage?
I backed it.
Oh, all right. Same. Yeah, I played a few of the demos they put out before they disappeared.
Me too.
I liked them. They were nice demos.
Yeah, that game had so much potential, and it's really, really sad that it never became a reality.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I discovered Myron. I liked Myron music. Do you ever listen to Myron tracks?
Yeah. He's the composer for that. Got it. His music's great.
Yeah, no, very good music. So I saw these games, the Initial D, Slipstream, and I was like, let me ask if you ever were into Drift Stage, and there we go, a fellow sufferer. Well, are you? Please tell me you're not an Unsung Story backer.
I have not heard of that game.
Good. All right. I can still declare more Kickstarter suffering then. Unsung Story was the game where a U.S. company said they were going to make the next Final Fantasy Tactics, allegedly got the Final Fantasy Tactics guy on board. And this company was clearly not prepared to make a strategy RPG. Eventually, the rights have been purchased by a different company that actually successfully publishes games. It's probably not going to be what people want when it comes out, but it is in development. To the credit of this studio, people aren't going to be happy about it. But you know what? Props to people who can publish games. It's hard. Games are hard to make.
The games are very difficult to make.
Let's get back to Slipstream, though. That was a fun Kickstarter tangent worth doing. But Slipstream did come out, and you did play, and at this point, when this game comes out, you're deep into speedrunning. You know you like playing driving games. So I'm assuming you picked this up with that intention.
Absolutely. That was a big consideration of mine. Yeah, it was cool. It's a lot like Outrun. It's very similar in terms of gameplay to it, where it's just like pseudo 2D racing game. It looks like it's 3D, but it's really not. And yeah, I like the style of it, and I thought it would make for a really unique speedrun. I haven't ran an Outrun game or a game that's like that, and I'm very glad that I did. Like the developer of Slipstream, very supportive and very, very like grateful for the speedrunning community. Like in particular, he reached out for my GDQ run, and he was so happy about it. I think he even donated to the event during that. But yeah, it's such a wholesome story, and it's a great game, and I enjoy running it.
So as I mentioned, the two different marathon VODs that I watched were different categories. Do you have a favorite category in this game? What was your coming to it? What was the first category you learned that seemed like it would appeal to you most, and then what ended up being your favorite category?
I'm not sure which one I did first. I know my favorite category was the Battle Royale. It's a shorter run. It's a very, very fun category to run. It's a battle royale. You're competing against a bunch of other cars, and after every track, there's a car that's eliminated that's in last place. And of course, at the end, there's some good memes in there. Plays a Fortnite-esque like default dance when you win. So yeah. But as for like the category I started with, speedrun.com says that I started with the Grand Prix mode, which is like the main story campaign of Slipstream, pretty much, where you would go through a fixed set of tracks and aim to get the most points. Like a traditional racing game, you get points after every race. The person with the most points at the end wins the championship. And I did most, if not all, the cups, and those are each about 20 minutes long. But I like those a lot. But I think the cannonball mode, especially, it's more of like you get to do everything.
Right.
It feels like a much more intense showcase of Slipstream, because you're going through these tracks with a lot of traffic, and it's a lot of fun chaos. But it's hard to pick between Cannonball and Battle Royale. They're each cool for their own ways.
Yeah, it was definitely interesting to try and, I mean, not only from the explicit description and the commentary, but also in terms of just sort of like figuring out the sort of moment to moment practical differences. Certainly, a big part of it, as you mentioned before in describing the Cannonball Max settings, was the tracks that you'd be doing, as well as the traffic that you're experiencing. But yeah, it's neat that you had all the opportunities. And specifically, you had the opportunities to do multiple types of categories. One thing I notice a lot with runners, it feels like when you get to a speed game, either you do one category or you do like just like a shotgun spread of categories.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you're like one or the other? Because I mean, looking at your your profile, you've done a lot of games, and that's kind of what it looks like to me. Is that like some games will just have one, and that also depends on the game. There's not always the opportunity for multiple categories. But do you have any particular outlook on that when you go to a game? Is it like, oh yeah, I really want to do a little bit of everything, or is it going to really depend on the game?
More often than not, I'll just go for any percent, whatever the main or the shortest category is. And if I like the game enough, then I'll go into the 100% categories. I did this with A Hat in Time. I did this with Road Trip Adventure. And yeah, it's a good way to get into it for me. I prefer shorter runs in general. But if I like a game and it's, the longer run is within like my time frame, not too long, but a little longer than 80%, then yeah, sure, I'll give it a shot. Why not?
Why not, right? Yeah. If you enjoy it, keep playing it, right? That's it seems to be the lesson. All right, let's get to, I had one more game that I wanted to ask specific questions. We already talked a little bit about OneShot because you brought it up in the context of the game that you would most like to get to GDQ, the one you've been submitting a lot. Yeah. How did you get into this one? Because again, this is kind of outside your normal what's the story here?
Oh, this is such a cool story. It's unlike any other way I've discovered a game. I went to a convention called Anime Expo in 2018.
Okay.
Had no idea what OneShot was. Never heard of it before. And I went there with a friend, and we were going to like touring the various like vendor booths there. And she was like, "Hey, let's go check out this game my friends like." And it's OneShot. And the devs are there, and there's like this cool art and merch. I was like, wow, this game looks really cool. I like the art style a lot. It looks cute. And it's the 2D adventure game. And then I got home and I ended up buying it. I played it and I just loved it. It's a really amazing casual game. If you like 2D adventure games, try out OneShot. It breaks the fourth wall in a lot of ways, and the less you know about it, the better. And then that's when I found out about its speedrunning community. There were a few active runners on the leaderboards to begin with, such as Durbill, who's a really cool speedrunner for OneShot, did a lot of work in that. And I learned the route, started running the game, and then that's when the community began to grow with more and more people and started doing any percent tournaments with the help of speed gaming. And we just wrapped up the second tournament, which was a lot of fun. But yeah, it's such an interesting story. I found out about it at an anime convention, and I had no idea what it was before then.
So I assume Anime Expo, much in the way that like MagFest does, must have like an area for indie devs to show off their games.
It's not I don't think it was a specific area. It was just with like the
vendor hall.
It might have been in like the artist area,
okay.
The artist alley, or the vendor booth. One of those two areas. It was a while ago, but yeah, that was fun.
And it looks really active. Like I'm actually, I mean, I don't want to say I'm surprised, but there's well over 3 dozen on the I guess what's the main category here, and this is one compared to some of the ones that we've discussed, which are maybe a few years in the rear view mirror. This is one that you're still coming back to, as you say, you're still submitting it to GDQ right now. We were just talking about categories. It looks like you've basically got the any percent glitch category on here. Did you have any plans to go to any of those other categories?
I've thought about running the Solstice mode, which is New Game Plus, essentially. You do 80% and then New Game Plus mode. That one's about an hour long. I've thought about running it, but there's not that many tricks in it. It's a lot of dialogue. So to me, it doesn't offer too much in terms of like additional worth for a speed run. The Solstice mode is fun on its own for its own reasons, but yeah, it's because for that reason I gravitate more towards the 100% run.
I did want to mention something for anyone interested in this game. I was really impressed by one feature, which is that there is automatic frame perfect text advancing. So you do not have to mash text in this game, which is outstanding.
Yes, that was something the community wanted for so long. We talked about earlier about stuff like carpal tunnel and hand injuries and stuff like that from gaming. When you would text mash in OneShot, you basically alternate your index and your middle fingers, and you would have to do that for extended periods of time. And it did cause me a little bit of hand pain, and I took breaks whenever that would happen. It's good to take breaks, by the way. And one of the developers of the game implemented the auto mash feature, which eliminated that completely as an issue. And I don't see any downfall to games implementing that.
Yeah, no, any sort of advanced text stuff like that, like certainly, having even a different button for, for doing, I feel like it's becoming more common, especially as, RPGs implement things like turbo features to put them on shoulder buttons, stuff like that. And anything like that is just, it's great. It's, you're encouraging people to replay. You're making it easier to do so. So hopefully, that will incentivize, folks to do that, to implement in games. But that was just one thing I wanted to call out as being impressed by, in terms of what was going on in the game. I think you mentioned earlier, this game you did have a particular skip you were really fond of. Did I recall that right?
Yeah, I brought it up when I talked about it first.
Right.
Where you would pass through the barrier while closing the game.
Right. That was it. I just wanted to make sure. I was like, I wanted to make sure that we got that under wraps. All right, so I'm going to start wrapping up the kind of the one-on-one formal script here. Folks, if you are watching, if you're with us, when I get to the end of the formal script, of course, you'll have the opportunity to formulate some questions if you want to throw them out there. But the thing I like to do in this interview series is to get a question from my previous guest for my next guest, to kind of pass that chain forward. My previous guest was Mifa, who's done Minecraft Dungeons, Family Guy, Back to the Multiverse, a bunch of other games. And they had this question for you. And this is kind of funny that they have to provide me the question without knowing who it's going to. So I want to emphasize that this was not targeted.
Okay.
So the question is, other than Japan, what culture interests you the most that you would want to go visit that country or place and just sort of experience it?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. Japan is at the top of my list, but for the sake of the question, I would love to one day visit Germany or England. I would love to go there. I think there's some really beautiful things to see there. The culture is good there. I've never been to Europe before, or even outside the United States. Yeah, I think besides Japan, I would love to see more of Europe.
Are there any particular landmarks or activities you have in mind there? I'm just curious.
Well, I think I would enjoy seeing Big Ben in London, checking out that area. That's a great question. It's very thoughtful.
It's sometimes
I wasn't ready for it, but yeah.
We get mostly speedrun questions. Sometimes people throw out food questions and music questions, and of course, you now get the opportunity to do the same yourself. So you get a speedrunner will be answering the question. The question does not have to be about speedrunning. It can be about whatever music, food, culture, travel. But it can be about gaming. You can ask that question too.
All right.
Do you have a question that you would like to pass along to the next guest?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do a speedrunning question. What speed game do you feel like deserves more recognition, and why?
Interesting. So I'm going to spoil for you now via the DM who the next guest will be. I feel like this is a pretty recognizable name. So I think maybe you'll recognize it. Does that ring a bell?
Who's this?
The that's their bread and butter. They've done that like a million different events. Like
I just saw the DM. Yeah,
okay.
I know them.
All right. All right, so that'll be fun. That question will be going to that runner. I'll announce that surely. I'm not usually like too secretive about it. I'll mention it probably in my Discord soon and spread the news on Twitter. I'm very excited to interview that next guest. I've been a fan of their stuff for years. So that was a really fun opportunity. All right. Well, so my usual next question, this is kind of funny. Amerlin must know my script or something, because usually the next question I ask is, what games are you looking forward to? What do you have your eye on in terms of future releases?
Oh, that's a tough question. I don't really follow new game releases too closely, but I got this email from Steam a little while ago. This might be the way I get into this game, for a game called Power Washing Simulator. So I was like, this seems like something I could play, maybe something I could speed run. It's in early access at the moment, but maybe I'll end up checking that out.
Have you played? So I've encountered some of these simulator games, and I think it's like must be a publisher who puts them out, and they're usually like budget titles. But I don't want to say that in the way that like makes it sound like they're necessarily bad games. They really scratch an itch for some people. Like some of my friends have gone into Thief Simulator, House Flipper, and Drug Dealer Simulator. Surprise! I hang out with a bunch of GTA runners. Of course, they love Drug Dealer Simulator. I recently played the demo for Mech Mechanic Simulator. Surprise! Again, into mecha stuff myself. Have you played a lot of these? Because I feel like for a while, the only ones I heard about were like Farming Simulator and the various truck simulators, the Euro Truck, whatever. Have you played these? Like, do you have a history with these simulator games?
I've played about 400 hours of Euro Truck Simulator. I think it's 400.
Wow.
So it's in it's like low 3-digit range. But yeah, it's the reason why I liked it a lot is just so relaxing to go on drives and road trips. I love driving in real life. I take any chance I can get to go on a little road trip. And that game, it can scratch that itch for me. I have a racing wheel and pedal, so it gets fairly close to the real deal. And aside from games with like direct simulator branding, I play a lot of driving games, simulators, such as Assetto Corsa and iRacing, which are these hardcore car racing simulators that are really accurate and sometimes unforgiving. I've always liked those. I've been playing those like for even since before I began speedrunning. Simulators are fun. I like it.
All right. I'm sorry. I'm looking at your speedrun.com profile. And I gotta ask, what's up with Pencil Sharpening Simulator?
Oh my god, yes, that is. I've been trying to get this game into GDQ for so long now. Must have been like 2 years, if not more. Like, yes, Pencil Sharpening Simulator, but it's cool because there's actual tech and there's an active community. Like, it's amazing.
Yeah, this is a big leaderboard. There's a lot going on here.
Like the skill ceiling is pretty high for any percent. Like there's times from like 4 or 5 minutes all the way down to 3 minutes. So it's not like you're doing the same thing over and over again. You can do skips after every pencil to skip like the pencil, like you putting the pencil in the sharpener, and the way you time the drill as well is important. It's so like. Even though it's like pretty active on speedrun.com, I wish it had more recognition and events. It's one of the weirdest games I've ran, and also one of my favorites. I love it.
That's good. No, it's fun to see too. It looks like something you have been running on and off over the years. So just cool to see very different games. I mean, we'll see if Power Washing Simulator bears any fruit speedrunning wise. Who knows? We'll see. Hard to say. Yeah. How about, are there people in the community that you feel like should have more eyeballs in them? If you could pick a few people and say like more eyeballs on this now, who would you pick?
As for runners or games?
I meant it as runners, but you could also throw out games.
All right. Yeah, there's a bunch of speedrunners out there who are really skilled at the games that they play and also stream on Twitch. Like for OneShot, for example, one of the best runners on there is Durbill. I think Durbill is a very talented runner. Streams are really funny, fun to watch and listen to. Yeah, there's also a lot of Hat in Time runners who stream, and they don't get that many viewers on Twitch, but they're amazingly skilled at the games that they play. I'm looking at some of these runners now. Like, for example, Hat in Time Any%. I'm looking at these top runners, and all of them have relatively small Twitch followings for the most part, but the skill that they express and their personalities, I think it's fun to watch, and I enjoy watching their streams. There's a lot of runners out there who do exactly that. They're highly skilled top runners, stream on Twitch, but they don't get that much recognition. Some of them do, but there's also a lot that don't. And yeah, I wish people like that got more recognition.
No, absolutely. It is so impressive, especially when people are dedicating themselves to specific games. You know, unfortunately, when it comes to the world of, Twitch, YouTube, whatever, game choice can end up mattering more than anything else. Even if the game is interesting or someone is very, very highly skilled at it. I'm a person who loves a wide variety of games. It's part of why I do a speedrun podcast, is I get to discover a lot of new games that way, which is a lot of fun for me. So hopefully, more people will learn about these other games. If people are looking for you and what you're up to, where should they be looking?
I do have a Twitter at Konasumi SR. Follow me there. I do tweet sometimes and post some funny memes here and there. That's also where you're going to find out about the speedrunning marathons I'm involved with, as well as whenever I stream, which is going to be on Twitch. You can find me on Twitch at twitch.tv/Konasumi. I haven't streamed very much lately due to college taking up a lot of my time, but since my finals are now over, perhaps I'll be streaming a little bit more often. But yeah, that's where you can find me. I also have a YouTube channel, youtube.com/Konasumi. I do hope to use that more. I have a lot of archives of my old runs on there.
Excellent. Now, if you're here with us live, I just dumped those links into the chat, so feel free to click on all those, follow, subscribe as appropriate. If you are listening after the fact on YouTube or Spotify, iTunes, check the show notes. You'll find all of the links there. Still do the same thing. Still follow, subscribe, etc. Konasumi, thank you so much for giving me all this time.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. This was really fun. I had a great time. It's great getting to talk to you.
I do need one more thing from you before we go to the Q&A, which is that I'm going to use a cheesy catchphrase, like let's boost on out of here. And when I say that, I need you to give me your best rocket engine noise.
Rocket engine noise?
Yes.
Okay.
Excellent. Folks, thank you so much for listening. Let's boost on out of here.
That come through? Awesome.
It did. Awesome. Good job. All right. Oh, Amerlin found the gum tape deathmatch vid. Excellent. I don't have any bot that prevents links, so you can just dump that in there if you really want to.
Yeah, go for it.
All right. So there were some questions that got dumped in here. We already did the what games are you looking forward to? Magi asks, what is the weirdest or most unique game that you've tried outside of Minor Ultra Adventures? Is there a next most weird game?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because Minor Ultra Adventures is definitely the weirdest game I've played. I'm going to go with Pringles for the Sega Genesis. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
No? Oh my god. It is one of the most iconic GDQ practice room memes, like in the practice room, the Pringles community for the Sega Genesis will have these stations, and people can come up and play Pringles whenever they want, loaded onto an EverDrive. It's a fan game for the Pringles brand for the Genesis. And it's like this 2D platformer where you play as the Pringles mascot, and you have to climb up navigate these stages by popping Pringles. And it's so bizarre, but it's also amazing and beautiful. It has a really active community. Like, I'm looking at the leaderboards, 120 runs for all A's, which is the main category.
I mean, once you pop, you can't stop, I guess.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly.
That's wild. Oh man, the Genesis is just too much. All right, I really need to ask this one that Amerlin put in the chat, which is, if given the chance, would you go track drifting?
I've always wanted to do something like that. I've never raced or drifted a real car before, but I would love to do that. I've done go-karts before, and I loved racing go-karts.
Can you
not
drift
in like
a
a
go-kart?
You can. You can slide it out a little bit, but you're not going to carry much momentum.
Yeah.
But no, I would love to try that one day. Be able to go out in a real car and drive as fast as I can, or drift even. Mm-hmm. Drifting's really hard. Like, it's really hard to get into. It requires a lot of seat time to know the physics of the car you're driving and how to maintain it during a drift. It's harder than it looks.
Yeah, I've heard. I'm not much of a motorsports person, but I was I'm I'm more of a chaos and destruction person, and so usually when I'm seeing cars, it's not good things that are happening to cars. And it was recently I saw some videos of what happens when there is unexpected rain at a motorsports event, which is everyone just leaves the road, just like not by their choice. they hit a turn, and the physics, they're very trained to expect a certain grip at the road, and it's not there because of fresh rain, and they all just kind of sail on down, into the corner, which is usually a grassy surface or something that it's safe to do so. But it's still kind of funny to see that happen. I'm trying to see what are any other questions that I missed. Have you ever heard of My Summer Car?
Yeah, I haven't played it myself, but I've watched a few streams of it. Do you know what it is?
Yes. Yeah. Well, so I have some friends who are. I'm one of my friends is actually an authentic Finnish individual who loves My Summer Car, which apparently is
cool.
A very authentic experience in itself. And I have a few friends who've been playing it, and I it's probably going to be in my future. I have a shtick on my stream where I let people pick games and they vote on them, and so it's going to be coming up probably. I wouldn't be surprised in the next few months if it happens, but it seems interesting. Like, as I mentioned before, I'm not a car enthusiast by any stretch, so I'm probably going to be very flummoxed by the car maintenance portions. I don't know anything about. Do you do any car maintenance stuff at all? I know you said you enjoy driving, but
I love cars, but I don't know that much about them. The most I've ever done was change a headlight bulb and refill my power steering fluid.
Okay, that's more than me. I've done the former. I've definitely changed out headlights and taillights, but
yeah, I'm an enthusiast, but I'm no mechanic by any stretch.
No, that's fair. That's I mean, that's better. That's better than me. I have like a degree in electrical engineering, but I will not solder anything. I don't ask me to do that. They wouldn't let me actually touch circuits in college because I routinely exploded things. So that's why I ended up programming. I was a software engineer for a period of time. All right. If you have any more questions that you want to get in right now, feel free to throw those in. We're still on the front page for another few hot minutes here. I'm trying to see if I missed anything and stuff that I wanted to ask. I feel like I got most of it. I wanted to ask, are you involved at all from an organization side with any of those marathons? I mean, it seems like you've been to Calathon quite a few times. You were to the first Calathon. Have you been involved in the organization side with any marathons, or?
A little bit. For Calathon in particular, I help out with the games committee. So I joined those meetings and helped them select games for the events. I'm also a stream tech there most of the time. I've also done donation reading. As for GDQ, I've volunteered many times in the past as a stream tech and as a camera operator, but nothing on the like organizational side.
Okay.
I did host my own speedrunning marathon for a bit called A Race Against Time, which is a driving game themed marathon. So that taught me a lot about how that all works: selecting games, opening submissions, marketing the event, making the layouts, running the stream. And it wasn't, I didn't do it by myself, but I was the main person behind it. So I've had a lot of exposure to the operation side of speedrunning and marathons, and that's something I always want to be involved with. I think it's really fun. I love that stuff. I want to be even more involved.
When it comes to running marathons, this is actually a question I had the opportunity to ask Boix, because I had Boix on the podcast right before the last Valuethon. Are there any like tools that are like were really useful or good? Because I forget when exactly. I feel like I had seen A Race Against Time. I feel like I'd been aware of it maybe via Twitter or something. I don't know if Wangus was big when you were doing those events. Are there any sort of tools that that like you feel like, oh, this is essential to running a marathon?
I think nowadays you can use what is it? Speedrun.com has a page. That's what we use for AirRat.
Okay.
Air Race Against Time to do submissions. I think we handled it all through there. I think you might still be able to
probably still see the pages for it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just checked. Still on there. Race Against Time. Schedule's on there. You can view all the submitted runs. I know. How do you say it? Onagus?
I say Wangus. Wangus. Yeah.
I never know how to
That's
properly
my
guess.
Say that. I don't know. I go vaguely phonetic, try to be confident about it. I can't guarantee results,
Yeah, that appears to be a very effective solution for marathon organizers, because it makes it a lot simpler, right? I think you can do a lot of scheduling work. You can have availability. I used it when I submitted to Mid-Spring Speedfling, and I liked it as a submitter. I'm not familiar with it on the organization side, but I think it's a wonderful tool.
Yeah, no, I've rarely ever been involved organizationally. I mostly just submit, but I got invited to do the RTA week thing. Do you know what RTA week is? It's
a Japanese event in Japan.
Yeah,
I've heard of it.
So there was a runner or group of runners who were trying to put together one day of a block of runs to be all Moonlight Sword Warriors, which is a From Software reference, and something both in Souls and Kingsfield and Armored Core, and they asked me to throw in a run, just because I run those games. And it was definitely an interesting experience to like navigate stuff that's mostly in another language, but for organizing that, they did use Wangus, which has very good language support for multiple languages, which is one of the good features of it. And I was impressed getting that glimpse of how it looks from the organizer's side, already liking it from the runner's side.
That's great.
Airmerlin has another good one here. If you could select one game that you don't run to be in a GDQ, what would it be? Because you mentioned earlier there are some great games out there that people don't know about. What game that you don't run, you're like, that really needs to be in a GDQ?
That's tough. Nothing is coming to mind immediately. I'm currently glancing at the speedrun.com games. Let's see if I can get an idea of something. Let's see. I don't know off the top of my head. That's a good thing, because that means a lot of the games that I know of have been in GDQ before. So that is good. Okay. There's Rolled Out. That is a game that I've been into.
Yeah. Of course that came out pretty recently, didn't it?
Yeah, it was like a few weeks ago. It was submitted for GDQ, but it wasn't accepted.
Interesting.
I have not played it or ran it myself, but from what I've seen of it, it looks awesome. It looks like the perfect Monkey Ball successor. And given my history with Monkey Ball, I would love to see a game like that in.
Oh man, Magi, has Yonoi 2 really not been in GDQ? No, wait a
I was
second.
on the couch. I was on the couch for it.
Wait a second. It's SGDQ 2018. Yeah. I'm gonna get the link right now. This game owns.
Yeah. I love Yonoi 2.
What a good game.
Another example of a game I think deserves even more speedrunning recognition.
Yeah.
It's a short 3D platformer with so many cool skips. And
yeah, I never
great.
heard of that until I think it was I had Rithen on the pod, and I talked to her about it, and I was like, wow, this started out as a joke, but it's really good, like a real banger. I was very impressed by that game.
An actual good game.
Yeah,
all
for
memes
sure.
aside.
All right, well, my final question for you is, who should I raid when we wrap this up in a second here?
Oh, do I get to pick?
You get to pick. Now, I should tell you that some number of the viewers are embed viewers. Hey, if you're on the front page of speedrunning.com, so I don't know how many will actually be in the raid, but we'll do it anyway.
Yeah, I'm gonna have a look and see who's live at the moment. We'll pick a good speedrunner to raid. Let's see. Let's see who's on. Oh, how about we raid? You know who Amber is? The Mario Kart runner.
Yes, yeah, no, I've had Amber on the pod before. She's
that's
very
perfect.
Good. Yeah, excellent.
Yeah.
All right, well, I already have that username, Amber underscore CXC.
Amber is super cool.
Cue that up. Ooh, doing Hollow Knight, which I didn't talk to her about, but I've talked to other people on this podcast about Hollow Knight, so I've learned more about that. That's usually not my wheelhouse, but anyway, I've queued that up. That raid's ready to go. I will now let you go. Thank you again so much. This is really a ton of fun.
Yeah, I'm glad you had fun. I had a lot of fun as well. It was really cool talking to you and exploring my speedrunning history more. A lot of the stuff I haven't talked about in much detail. So,
well, I'm glad we were able to share those stories. There were a lot of fun stories. So hopefully more people get to hear that soon when the VODs go up. And have a good night and take care.
Yeah, you as well. Thank you for your time.